Okay, so as with all of the ethical theories we're going to be exploring this semester, these three relativist ethical theories, they have strengths and they have weaknesses. One of the strengths of all of these theories of ethics is that they radically simplify morality and decision making. With ethical subjectivism, I simply have to consult what I believe to be the case. And what I believe to be the case is going to determine what is morally prohibited, morally permitted, and morally obligatory. And even perhaps easier with emotivism, I don't even have to really consult my inventory of beliefs. I just have to just kind of check my gut. Like, how does this make me feel? Does this seem like something that feels wrong to do? Or does it feel like it's the right thing to do? And with cultural relativism, I just have to learn about what's expected and what's considered normal in whatever culture I have to find myself in. And I allow sort of the status quo of the culture to determine for me what's right and what's wrong. Okay? Another potential strength of subjectivism and probably emotivism as well is that these seem to promote a certain degree of autonomy. Right? That if we're going to say that what the individual believes or what the individual feels is the right or wrong-making feature of a particular action, then that's kind of turning over moral judgment, giving the power of moral judgment to individual people. Now, that's not to say that a group of subjectivists is necessarily going to tolerate everybody doing whatever they want. I think that's a common mistake, is they think that the subjectivist gets to do whatever they want. And it's like, well, no. It's just that the subjectivist gets to judge in whatever way he or she wants to judge. It gives them the power to judge, but not necessarily act. An individual subjectivist may exist in a culture that says, yeah, buddy, you think that was a morally permitted thing to do? Well, I got to tell you, we don't think that was a morally permitted thing to do, and now you're going to pay the price for that, okay? So a subjectivist doesn't get to do whatever they want. They just get to kind of think whatever they want. Whereas the cultural relativist, to be an authentic, genuine cultural relativist, would have to accept that they can be wrong about their moral beliefs because it's the norms of the culture, the expectations of the culture that determines what's right and wrong, not the individual. Okay. The benefit to that, though, is that for the cultural relativist, perhaps this creates some unity in the culture. We have a group of people that is defined by a shared body of values and beliefs and ideas. And maybe this even gives the veneer of allowing for diversity, right? We don't go around the world colonizing other cultures as cultural relativists in order to export our particular moral values into other cultures. Of course, one of the weaknesses of these relativisms is that communities may not be based on sustainable values, right? So we may have a certain degree of kind of chaos and anarchy if we allow subjectivism or emotivism to become the norm for our community, because we're going to have a lot of people who aren't unified and have conflicting values. And when we have those conflicting values in relativism, we don't really have a way to resolve those conflicts rationally, right? Because in subjectivism, it's what I believe that makes my belief true. My believing it makes the belief true. And in emotivism, what I feel is what makes it true, okay? So when we get into these situations where we don't have a cognitive or rational way to resolve conflict, we may end up moving towards resolving conflicts through force. And this all may undermine our ability to have common ground with one another and to be united and unified as a community. And as I talked about in the emotivism lecture, feelings can be really misleading. Sometimes we feel things that we shouldn't feel, and sometimes there's people who don't feel things that they should feel. Think about the psychopath or the narcissist, or the sadist, right? The people that take satisfaction and joy in hurting others, okay? And as we saw in a couple of the theories, there seems to be a certain amount of logical incoherence to them. They kind of defeat themselves. When we make a claim like, hey, we should be cultural relativists, and if you don't believe that, you're wrong. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What if I'm in a culture that doesn't accept cultural relativism? If you accept cultural relativism, you'd have to say, I'm right in my culture. If my culture is highly intolerant, and we're intolerant of cultural relativism, and you're a cultural relativist, you'd have to agree that we're just as good as you are. And you've got these two contradictory claims, right? Cultural relativism is good, cultural relativism is not good, and the cultural relativist, to be consistent, would have to say both are true. And that doesn't seem to be logical. Perhaps a greater weakness to all of the relativist theories is that all of these relativistic theories, they totally destroy the idea of moral progress and of human rights, because moral progress is a concept that has to do with movement toward a better state. Okay, so moral progress would be some sort of societal movement toward being ethically better. But if the relativists are right, there's no such thing as better, because there's no objective standard by which to judge one society against at one time against that same society at another time. So we look back on the United States' history of slavery and we say, well, to be consistent as a relativist, all I can say is that they were different. The slave-owning societies are not worse than free societies. They're just different, because I don't have any basis on which to make the claim that one society or one culture or one person is better than another. And so then we come up with problems like this. We've got, child brides, right? So here's this guy, Warren Jeffs. I think he's actually in jail now. And he married a bunch of children. As a grown adult. Here's him marrying a 12-year-old. And I just read recently that in some country, another country somewhere else in the world, they just lowered the age for girls to be able to get married to adult men to 9. Okay, and if the relativists are right, we just kind of have to shrug our shoulders and say, well, whatever, to each his own. Don't impose your values on that culture. Okay, so of course this leads to a tremendous amount of suffering. This is one of the paradoxes of tolerance, right? That tolerating the intolerable can really lead to tremendous suffering for some folks. So you think about, the phenomenon of honor killings or child brides, like I mentioned before. Female genital mutilation is something that comes up very commonly as something that we shouldn't tolerate. Well, that's inconsistent with relativism. Relativism would say, no, you have to let those cultures and those societies do them, and you do you. Okay? Now, what's the most interesting feature of ethical relativism to me is that even though it appears to be sort of inclusive and respecting autonomy and diversity, paradoxically, it seems to lead to absolutism and authoritarianism, right? It's like, I'm right. And because we don't have any rational means to have this discussion, I'm just going to force my beliefs on you. A famous sort of illustration of this was from the congresswoman from New York, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, said in a 60 Minutes interview, I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right. Okay, so you can see here that there's this weird combination where that kind of epistemological relativism, this area where we're concerned with facts and knowledge and what's true and what's false, sort of embracing that leads to a weird kind of authoritarianism where I'm not going to have this argument with you. I'm just going to tell you what's right. And if you don't accept that, I'm going to impose that on you. All right. So those are our relative ethical theories, and we'll discuss those on our course discussion board.